War is breaking out everywhere. This is your World War III breaking news emergency update. The Israeli Ministry of Health has reportedly placed hospitals and clinics in northern Israel around the city of Haifa on high alert to prepare for thousands of casualties as they hand out weapons to their civilian population in anticipation of an imminent war with Hezbollah that almost every political pundit that I hear from across the political spectrum, even amongst the most conservative when it comes to their geopolitical prognostications, is saying the same thing, that war with Lebanon is imminent. And of course, that war with Lebanon, when it begins, is going to spread throughout the region like wildfire. Now again, that is just but one of the many theaters and one of the many data points within that theater that we have to talk about today, because really ranging from low-level political polarization that we're seeing here in the West, which is starting to manifest as fascism in some countries, political populism, extremism from all kinds, civil unrest, protests. Now you're seeing narco-terrorism in Ecuador, scenes that I don't think I've ever even seen in a movie that I've witnessed today, which is completely out of this world. The closest thing that resembles it is the movie that I reviewed on this channel a few years ago. It was called New Order. It was all about the breakdown of this unnamed Latin American country that descends into total lawlessness and anarchy. And that is exactly what is happening there now. If it's not this attempted coups, it's civil war, it's war between nation states, all the way up to the lukewarm, multipolar, almost nuclear war that we're seeing unfold before our eyes. So it's going to be difficult for me to triage all the info today because I've been on hiatus for the last 72 hours. You might have caught the interview we did with My Self-Reliance. A very great interview. I'd encourage you to go check it out. But before we get into the World War III business, on a practical note, you got to get prepared for some wild climate perturbations because we're about to see some insane extremes in 2024. 2023, hottest year on record. December of 2023, particularly in my neck of the woods, one of the hottest ever, the hottest ever, I should say. We had about 1/30th the amount of precipitation. Finally, we got about a foot of snow on the ground just today. But what we're seeing here is extremes. Now, let me quickly explain this map because it might be counterintuitive. You might think, well, it's supposed to be cold in the north and it's supposed to be warm in the south. This is actually a temperature anomaly map. So what it means is that red is above average for this time of year. Blue is below average. So really, when you're looking at this, you might think, well, Texas is colder than Northern Ontario, but that's untrue. This just means relative to what Texas typically experiences, it's way colder. In fact, to the tune of about minus 30 or 30 degrees colder than it typically is. So I don't even know if it's going to hit zero here because I don't know what the temperatures typically are. I presume it's going to. Now, we're going to see this massive blast of Arctic air, which is going to send temperatures plummeting in some cases to minus 50 in some of these regions in the mountains. And again, you're still seeing, these record temperatures up here in the north. But this system is supposed to last for probably the next week or so in the very least. So you need to be prepared. We've seen what happened last year. The more the climate pendulum swings wildly, the more it's going to catch people off guard. You might not think you're going to be stuck in traffic, or you might think you're just going to make that daily commute home that maybe takes you 45 minutes to an hour. But if you get caught in a snowstorm, if the highway gets iced over and you find yourself in the midst of a pileup, you're not getting help for 24 to 48 hours. And we've seen that happen last year where people were stranded and froze to death in their vehicles in America, in the East Coast. Okay, so you have to be prepared. In the very least, always make sure your fuel tank is topped off. Always make sure that you got some blankets. Make sure that you wear a jacket. I know we all do it. We go into our cars in the dead of winter. We use the remote control start and we just jump in there and without a jacket or, fully prepared. But always got to do that. Just make a habit of doing it. You don't know when you're going to break down. Make it a habit of having tools just in case you need to get yourself out of a jam, booster cables, if you can, some traction device in case you get stuck, a small folding shovel. We talk about all this practical preparedness stuff on the channel. If you can go one step further, get yourself a small propane heating system so you can keep yourself warm if you do get stranded on the highway. It might not even be that your car breaks down, but it might be that such that you don't want to sit there and idle for a day or two. And your car will idle for a day or two, but you don't want to necessarily waste your fuel in that way. So just get yourself a little small 1 canister of propane, one of those portable heaters. That will take you at least a few extra hours if you need it. But we could potentially see what the situation is going to be for a lot of people. It's not going to be stranded in your car. It's going to be a grid down situation because the Texas power grid, if this situation endures, will see more power outages like they've seen a few years ago. So just be prepared for it. In addition to ourselves, we also have to contend with the weather. Now, how the hell am I going to talk about all this stuff? I've been on hiatus for 3 days, so I don't even know what the hell is going on, but I know everything that's going on, which is crazy. I can't even constellate the big picture anymore because there's just so much data. It's just overwhelming. In Taiwan today, they issue a air raid alert on everybody's phone. Presidential alert, missile flyover over Taiwan airspace. Be aware. Now, apparently they walked this back and they said, oh, it was just a satellite. We all know, or maybe some of you know, the ones who are up to speed on what's going on, Taiwan is about to have an election, okay? Now, according to Chinese and Taiwanese people who I follow, they're saying that, hey, there's been like over 50 satellite launches this year. So why now are we making a big deal about this? Well, obviously it's for political purposes. Okay, so regardless of who wins the election, most candidates who are the front runners are people who lean towards the West. So it's very likely that they're going to open the floodgates to Western weapons. And of course, that's going to antagonize and provoke the Chinese, who are going to put an embargo around Taiwan right around the time when the Middle East heats up. Now, before we talk about that, or before we go eastward, I should probably talk about one of the most impending wars that's about to happen. And that is the war with Lebanon. Now, here's the information up to date coming out of Israel, okay? And this is from mainstream news, most of it. The Israeli Ministry of Health has reportedly placed hospitals and clinics across northern Israel, including Rambam Medical Center in the city of Haifa, on high alert in preparation to receive thousands of possible casualties. In addition to that, the IDF, Israeli Defense Force, has begun the distribution of weapons and ammunition to standby defense squads in northern Israel along the border with Lebanon. So these are like militia groups, okay? Very much like we've seen happen in Ukraine, in Kiev. Remember the Time magazine photo shoot where they got all those civilians to stand in front with their weapons and blah? That's what we're going to see here again. Northern evacuation of around 250,000 people. That has been ongoing since the start of the conflict. We have the northern base in Israel, which is one of the most critical command and control centers in that region, was heavily targeted by Hezbollah in the last 48 hours. This, of course, after a string of assassinations of high-ranking Hezbollah officials. Now, that all started off with assassinations of IRGC, brigadier generals, and high-ranking Hamas officials. Now they've moved completely into targeting the Hezbollah leadership, which is effectively a declaration of war against Hezbollah. I mean, there's no other way to put it. Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, knows that his number is going to get called at some point, so he has to make a choice as to whether or not he's going to initiate the war or wait for Israel to bring the war to them. We also have Israel moving multiple launch rocket systems towards the northern border. This is what you would do first before you mobilize all the troops towards that region. Okay, so it's looking as though all indications point towards a major war with Hezbollah is about to erupt. And pretty much all the pundits that I've heard, even amongst the most conservative, are all saying the same thing, that war in that region is imminent, and once it kicks off with Hezbollah, then the whole region potentially erupts in flames, because there are the groups that are pro-Iranian groups who are saying in Syria and Iraq and Iran, who are going to support that effort. So the whole situation is going to flare up probably around the same time. And I think what we're seeing right now is that they know that once the first real vertical escalation happens with Hezbollah, very quickly the dominoes will start to fall throughout the region. What we've seen so far is a very gradual, inclined, horizontal escalation, but I think that all stops when Israel and Lebanon really start duking it out. We're talking about the Houthis becoming more activated, and I think this is why the U.S. military hasn't acted on Yemen yet, because they understand that once they do that, the whole situation is going to flare up. So they almost have to coordinate their attacks with whatever Israel is about to do. So I do think it is going to be all or none at this point in time. And Hezbollah has also sent a letter to their leader today. Apparently this is a customary practice in the run-up to a conflict. I'm not going to read the entire thing, but this is kind of the nail in the coffin in terms of our prediction that the war with Hezbollah is imminent. A letter from the Mujahideen of the Islamic Resistance to Secretary General of Hezbollah, His Eminence Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah. In this message, they write, and I'm only going to read a few snippets just to give you the idea, because I don't want the algorithm getting the wrong idea. Your soldiers are at your command to let God punish the enemies through his hands and heal the hearts of a believing people. O our master, true promise of God and his manifest strength, your soldiers have offered their lives to God. And yada, 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 basically, we're getting ready to go to war for you. That's what they're saying, all right? So the war on that front is coming. Now, what you're seeing here is completely unrelated, but at the same time related. These are columns and trainloads of tanks that South Korea is currently moving towards the border with the North. People don't realize how much on a razor's edge things are in Korea right now. It's being completely overshadowed by everything else going on in the world. But Kim Jong-un today had said that, and this is how you know, like fratricide, like civil wars are the most bloodiest of wars. For some reason, it's the people who you share the same lineage with that you fight with the hardest, even if it's like a sibling rivalry. I mean, maybe you've had some family disputes and you know how hard family members can fight with one another. Well, the same thing is true when you have these affinally connected countries like the Koreas. And North Korean leader Kim Jong calls South Korea their principal enemy. Think about that. People who are like the most genetically identical to you than can possibly be. That's your mortal enemy. They say they have no intention of avoiding war. Now, here's what's going on with South Korea, okay? The South Koreans are resuming military drills on the border. This comes on the heels of the island that had to be evacuated as a result of the North Koreans firing on it or close to it. They've scrapped the mutually agreed buffer zone in the Yellow Sea due to recent North Korean artillery drills, and they're going to resume their own artillery drills and exercises near the border. So that whole 2018 non-military accord is scrapped. It's done. Finito. We are back to, post-Korean War levels of tension there on that front. And it does not look good. So we very likely will see a massive escalation on that front. This is a video of the IRGC's ballistic missiles. Apparently they're about to do some sort of major military exercise in the southern part of the country. Now, of course, south, that's close to the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, Iran is a massive country, so what do they mean by south? But this would be a repositioning of assets towards, where everything could potentially flare up in and around the Persian Gulf. So doesn't look good. This is the big guns. This is their big equipment. For all we know, they might even got a nuke or two on there. I highly doubt it. But with all of this cooperation between North Korea and the Russians in particular, and who knows what the North Koreans, I mean, it only just came out that the North Koreans had provided Hamas. I mean, there was speculation about it, but that the North Koreans have provided them weapons, and then the North Koreans have went from artillery shells right up to some of their best missiles to give to the Russians. So you know there's a lot more cooperation than is already known about. Okay, so that's something worth knowing about. Now, the situation in Ecuador, I'm not going to say much about it because it's a developing situation, but basically the president there has declared martial law across the country, and they've mobilized their armed forces. There's people being assassinated in the streets. It's completely out of this world. And as far as I know, it's the result of gang member, high-level gang member who was recently arrested, and then he broke out of jail. And so there's chaos. Some people are saying the CIA is involved. Some people think that the CIA are the ones who are, you know, actually puppeteering the government, and that these narco-terrorists are somehow the good guys, which I don't know how you could make that claim when you're seeing some of the scenes come out of there. I'm certainly not going for that. I'm not sold on that point of view, I should say. But it doesn't look good, man, because, of course, if you have unrest in that region, you're going to see an even worsening refugee crisis and immigration crisis on the southern border. Crazy, crazy times. Now, apparently, and let me see if I can find the actual picture here. A Russian nuclear facility, okay? For almost a week now, residents in the Moscow region have been enduring very record cold temperatures, okay? Really, it was only Russia. They were like one of the only places in the world up until the last few days who was seeing below average temperatures, including the Scandinavian countries. But so apparently, a station that is integral to coordinating their, command and control for their nuclear strikes was they lost power or something like that. This is where the missile warning systems units are on duty around the clock. All information from the ground and echelons of missile warning system flows through this place, and apparently it shut down temporarily. Now, I don't know why you would put it in a place that was so vulnerable to the critical infrastructure going offline. But in addition to that, in the last 24 hours, guys, there's been a copious amount of what are called emergency action messages. Most of you know what these are. These are the high-level, strategic, secret, encrypted messages that get sent typically from NORAD, command and control, to the nuclear submarines, to the strategic forces, okay? So if they were ever to give the go-ahead to launch the missiles, it would be in one of these encrypted messages. And according to, I can't remember what the individual's name is. If I can remember, I'll certainly give them a shout out in the future. But they monitor this stuff closely, and they said that for the second day in a row, there are more than 30 messages broadcast in a day. After filtering out duplicates, there are only 9 unique messages today, but it's nonetheless unusual to have such a high amount of traffic in a row clustered together like this. So did this have something to do with the fact that they were worried about what was going on in Russia, and that Russia might have more of a trigger finger because their command and control was compromised? Was that why there was more emergency action messages? Remember, we're never going to know if we're at a lower DEFCON level, which is a higher risk of nuclear war, until it's too late. So you always, especially DEFCON 3, I always say DEFCON 3 it might as well be DEFCON 1. Because if you're at DEFCON 3, which is a heightened state of readiness, the only next 2 steps are nuclear war is about to happen, and then nuclear war is imminent. So you almost always have to act, not always looking over your shoulder, but you have to expect that things can progress to DEFCON 1 rapidly at this point, within hours. So that is worth knowing about. Now, we're going to talk about the Bitcoin fiasco in just a moment. Some crazy stuff went down there today. Let's just make sure we got all their other bases covered. So there's a lot of military exercises on the horizon. So this is Slovakia transporting weapons and NATO military equipment being transferred across the territory of Slovakia, including HIMARS, multiple launch rocket systems, self-propelled guns, and so on. Of course, everybody is preparing for war. There was it Sweden today? It seems every other day a commander of a European country's military is silently warning its population that they need to prepare for full-scale war. And Sweden was no exception today. A warning from a Swedish commander. The good times are over, warns the commander of the Swedish Defense Forces, and of course they have now pledged to, as soon as they get into NATO, okay, and this is very significant knowing what's happened with Finland, and Finland has decided today permanent closure of their border with Russia. Guys, we got to start really taking this shit seriously. If you didn't catch that video I just did with Sean over at My Self-Reliance, go and check it out, because that's the level where you want to be thinking about this stuff from. Anyway, Finland completely closed the border. Sweden has committed that they're going to send troops immediately to the Baltic states. Immediately to the Baltic states once they become the 32nd member of NATO. And of course, whatever remains of Ukraine will become the 33rd. Isn't that just a numerological coincidence? Now, the good times are over, warns the commander of the Swedish Defense Forces. Commander Michael Biden wakes up the civilian audience and prepares his country for the worst. We are far from where we should be, he says. There's a threat of war and all citizens must act to strengthen the country's defense. So he's talking here about civil defense. Okay, he expressed his concern that the modernization of civil defense is not happening quickly enough. Europe is going on a full-on war footing right now, and everybody is fast asleep. And now we have word that Russia might withdraw from Interpol. Okay, Interpol is the international police. I think almost every country, with the exception of North Korea, Afghanistan, and a few others, are members of Interpol. So Russia may withdraw from Interpol, an international criminal police organization whose members are 195 countries, and the Assembly is considering restricting Russia's access to the Interpol search database. So this is just another in a string of global decoupling operations that is currently underway and currently dividing us more and more. Now, this took place in Italy. This is a bunch of soon-to-be brown shirts, I presume, who are pledging allegiance to some guy who existed, 75 years ago. Maybe it was Mussolini. But I think it's more of a, we're just seeing the rise of these extremist groups. They're giving the Nazi salute. And this is what we're going to see more and more. And this is the problem, is that this is a positive feedback loop in the most negative of senses. Because the more we stir up shit in the Middle East and Northern Africa, the more immigration that you're going to see from the global south to the global north. And as that happens, you're going to get more extremism. And as you get economic contraction and austerity in Europe, people are going to be looking for scapegoats. And people are going to start, I've seen this coming from a mile away. I mean, I talked about this years ago, that this is going to be what's happened. We're going to start more wars in the Middle East. That's going to lead to more refugee crisis. And that is going to stoke the flames of these more radical populist movements, which are eventually going to lead to civil unrest and possibly civil war in a lot of these countries. Now, the manifestations of that are going to be different in every respect. It's never going to be a one-to-one thing, like we've seen the truckers' protests here in Canada, which was about the intervention, but there was a lot of underlying attention that precipitated that. It wasn't just about that particular issue. It was a lot of other things. In Germany, of course, the farmers there are protesting the lack of subsidies from the government. I think I have some video footage of that as well. And what's happening in that situation is farmers are upset because, okay, rightly so, we're seeing a greater centralization of every corporation, of every multinational. They're taking over everything. That said, you know, it's take a big bite of the big manure sandwich, because everybody is getting squeezed out. Whether, it doesn't matter if you're a small business or if you're a medium scale farmer, where it's, you know, you're not big enough to be incorporated, or you don't have enough land that you're just maybe, you know, getting by. I mean, a lot of farmers on good years make a lot of money, and the government does subsidize them. In North America, it's to the tune of $30 to $40 billion. I'm from a farming community, but a lot of it has been consolidated into these bigger corporations, and eventually, let's get real, the whole process is going to be automated anyways. So a lot of these people are going to be out of a job, and this is going to be very reminiscent of what we've seen with the Uber drivers and the cabbies who were protesting, you know, every time Uber came into their community. So, you know, slightly different. Maybe we're a little ways off yet, but with GPS and robotics and automation, it's not going to be long before this is all automated anyways. So we're just seeing, you know, this is the beginning of the collapse of this whole financial model in a nutshell. And it is going to drive all sorts of extremism, because everybody's going to be looking for a scapegoat. And as Nate Hagen calls it, it is the great simplification. All right. Now, moving back to the east, as much as you like looking at her, I'm sure. Where should we go here? Let's see here. Okay, so a lot of people have been putting up a stink because many accounts on X, Elon's platform, were removed. But apparently some have been reinstated. And apparently a lot of these accounts were pro-Palestinian, you know, anti-establishment accounts. Everybody's got a different view of what the establishment is nowadays. But apparently some of them have been reinstated. But to me, what this says is that maybe there's somebody who is, you know, working at X, formerly known as Twitter, who is very pro-Israeli narrative. Or maybe this is more top-down than we think, and maybe this really is getting rid of all the dissidents before the real war starts. And if that's true, then I don't know how I'm still on there. Even though I tried to provide, you know, explanations of both sides, but I'm a humanitarian. I don't like injustice, whether I see it happening to Ukrainians. I post a lot about, you know, the injustices that Ukrainians are being faced by their own government, who are mobilizing them in the streets, and we'll talk about that in just a moment, to, you know, what's happening to the Russians in the trenches, to the Ukrainians, to the Israelis who were taken hostage in the atrocities that were committed on October 7th. I genuinely care about everybody. So maybe that's what's insulating me against that, but let's not speak too soon, because the night is young, and of course I'm talking about what may be the twilight of our species. This is a map that just indicates all of the many exercises that NATO is going to be partaking in this year that simulate war preparations with Russia. Okay, so in Latvia, Winter Camp 24 exercise is about to start here in mid-January. February 28th to April 21st, we're going to see 50,000 military personnel, 500 to 700 aircraft, and 50 ships are going to be involved in Defender of Europe 24. I mean, look at this map. And people think that the Russians are crazy for thinking that we're planning on going to war with them. Steadfast Defender is yet another one, and that is going to be followed by Northern Response 24, as well as Quadriga 24, happening in Germany from February to April. We're going to see deployments of thousands of troops. And remember that old mantra, there are no military exercises, only World War III disguises. So it could go down absolutely any moment. What else do we got? Romania, planning on being the #1 weapons hub. They are trying to build this corridor like there is no tomorrow. It's like it's almost like a military campaign, like the scale of this building operation, and they're trying to do it rapidly. Some people think it's because eventually this is how they're going to get weapons into that part of the region, or potentially get it built quick so they can assist in the taking of Moldova. Of course, along the border regions, Romania's military has been on the highest state of alert probably for over a year now. When those missiles started flying over, they started building bunkers and the whole 9 yards. Russia does not plan to open the border with, Finland does not plan to open the border with Russia, and that is not good, because if there's anyone who's really prepared to fight the Russians in a nuclear war, it's definitely the Finns. And apparently, this could probably just be, there's truth to this, and there's definitely a need to do an overhaul of the nuclear weapons program. But to me, this is stuff we've already known, but they're just putting it out there so that they can sell the population on why they need to upgrade all the nuclear weapons. Basically, what they're saying here is that the nukes are so old that there are no technicians who fully understand them anymore because they're not alive anymore. So it's such a dated technology that you don't have people who were there when these were built from the ground up, that they can't be upgraded anymore. And this is part of the reason why they need to cycle them out. Forgive me for what I'm about to do. Oh, man, getting stiff here looking at this screen. All right, the Houthis have attacked once again, and now, of course, they've been given their finaler ultimatum. But like I said, guys, when it blows up in the Middle East, it's all going to blow at once. You can't really have it any more contained. Yes, you can have the thing which is really inside Israel, but once it crosses a border, it's it. It's game over, and that's when they're going to make their move. They do have some more ships coming in from that region. You have ships from India coming in from the UK, and of course, all of the what we would view as the Axis as well, including the Iranians. The Iranians today detained a United Arab Emirates tanker, which is a major escalation, carrying suspicious material to Israel, they say. The Shafak news agency reported the tanker was seized in Iranian territorial waters. So did they potentially get a hold of some weapons? I don't think Israel would put anything on the water that could be commandeered unless they were doing it, unless this was a 4D chess move and they wanted the Iranians to get a hold of this, and maybe they're going to give them some misdirection or disinformation. Of course, in Iraq, the Iraqis are giving the U.S. an ultimatum that if they don't withdraw their troops, that it's going to be another Kabul-like scenario in Afghanistan where people are going to be hanging off airplanes. So they want the military bases out of there. I'm telling you, man. And how is oil? The only reason right now why oil is still low is because the United States continuously breaks records for oil output. But that's it. Like Nate Hagen says, what you have is you have a bunch of straws in a cup that always has the same amount of oil. It's just that now we're slurping it even faster. So once it starts to go backwards, that's it. I mean, once the production rate in the United States starts to go down, that's when you see oil prices skyrocket, which is why Bloomberg is saying that oil prices can double if a war breaks out. Now, you have a Russian analyst today, I overheard, say that he thinks that oil could contract another 20%. But really, 20% of 70, it's a lot, but it's not going to stay there. The oil market is as volatile as can be. You're going to see wild swings up to 200, probably down to 20 again if there's another, what are they calling it, disease X type situation. We all know that's coming. Fear and greed index is getting pretty high. I mean, in spite of everything that's going on, for people to still be buy right now is kind of insane to me, okay? I should probably mention that the Ukrainian military today bought 50,000 women's military uniforms. Now, if this isn't one of the most insane things, people might say I'm sexist for saying this, but look, the birth rates in Europe as a whole, in Ukraine in particular, are well below replenishment levels. Now you're going to take the women and you're going to put them in a uniform, put them on the front lines. One of the cardinal reasons why we haven't done that historically is because women are there to make the babies. Now, I know some people don't seem to think that that's an important thing nowadays, but that's a pretty damn important thing. And so when I see guys getting scooped up in the back of vans against their will and now getting ready to conscript, and we were saying this was going to happen over a year ago, and everybody's like, you're crazy. Now they're doing it, which is insane. We've already seen it. But here's the crazy thing. There's this new mobilization law that's about to come into practice. I think it was the 9th. I think it was today. So Ukrainians are taking out all of their money from the bank because what they're going to do, and this is a major red flag for anybody in Europe who's paying attention for what they're going to do to you. If you don't think they're going to do it to you, then you're crazy. Basically, this whole new mobilization law that's coming into place is going to restrict access, restrict the kind of access you can get. Oh, you still got 12%, just checking it out, to everything that you need to sustain life. You need to shop. You can't use your bank card. If you need to, just do banking, or you need to have any access to any services, a driver's license, passport obviously is out of the question. You're not going to be able to do it. So people are scrambling to get their monies out of the ATMs in anticipation of this. This is what I've been told. Now, again, mixed messages. I'm sure it's not everybody, and I'm sure anybody who's doing it ain't making it public, because, you still have probably, I don't know how many million guys there who could potentially be conscripted, and I'm sure they don't want to draw attention to themselves. So it's a pretty shitty situation. And in many cases throughout Ukraine right now, they're without power because of all the airstrikes that the Russians have been doing. I believe there's around 1,000 towns and villages. And remember, there's only around 30 million people left there. Some people say there's only 20, 25. 1,000 villages in 9 regions have been left without power. It doesn't help that energy is getting very expensive in Finland. I believe it was Finland the other day. Somebody sent me a message. It had peaked. Typically, it's around 7 cents per kilowatt hour. And I think now it was like $2.34. I think it went down since then because it fluctuates by the day. And that's how their system works there. So pretty crazy. And there was a German pipeline that was sabotaged that signals that somebody ain't too happy inside Germany. And this was a clear-cut case of sabotage, okay? Unknown persons caused 1.6 million euro damage, which in the grand scheme of things is nothing, by drilling 8 holes in a pipeline under construction for LNG terminal in northern Germany. So again, it's small, but it's a sign that people are unsatisfied with the government and how they're dealing with this whole Nord Stream thing. As I indicated, 2023, based on ice samples and things like that, they're saying it's the hottest year in 100,000 years, 1.48 C. And some people are saying, well, it's the heat island effect, and the stations at which they're getting these regions are biased, and they account for all that. It's aggregate data from around the world, but the heat island effect is a thing that's actually contributing to the heating. So again, I don't make any prescriptions. There's going to be someone that gets their panties in a twist saying, oh, Nate, you advocate to take the farmers' tractors away, and I don't. It's just, this is what it is. And you can pretend. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater is what I always say, okay? I mean, just because you admit that this is happening doesn't mean that you're a World Economic Forum stooge who wants to get everybody on a carbon credit system or a social credit score because you burn too much, gasoline. You can be the person who understands the science of it all, but is making no prescriptions. Now, at some point, because I know that prescriptions are not going to work, I have a cynical view, perhaps. I think it's realistic that right when you start imposing those excessive laws on people, they're going to revolt. And then it's just going to lead to social chaos. So that's why I say, sure, do it if you want. People are just going to revolt, and then the situation is going to get worse, and everything is going to fall apart. So instead of trying to, I'm not getting into the realm of prescription here, but instead of trying to present, it's how we present this information to people. Like Nate Hagen's made a great point. He said, I told my dad, my father-in-law, he wanted me to explain how, the greenhouse effect works. And he said, that really makes sense when he explained just the science of it. Like, yeah, that makes sense to me. how, the heat gets trapped, and, every little aspect of civilization is like a mini fire. Like this screen is creating heat. The air conditioners are creating heat. And cumulatively, even though it's very, very infinitesimally small in the grand scheme of things, it adds up year after year. And then his dad or his stepdad or father-in-law said to him, well, what should we do about it? And then he started saying, well, we're probably going to have to do this. We're going to have to cut back. We're going to have to create all these laws. And then right away, the father-in-law says, I almost said stepdad again, that we're not going to be able to, or I don't believe in any of this nonsense. You don't know what you're talking about. So it's like, I don't get it from a prepping point of view. I mean, what is the taboo with just accepting the science of this? Why does there have to be this immediate knee-jerk reaction just because some old geezer somewhere are trying to take our rights away? With respect to it, they take our rights away every time we go to war. Yet, you see a lot of people, they're still gung-ho for war. They're still gung-ho against fighting against the terrorist threat. And I assure you, even with the immigration thing, as well-intended as it might be, they'll find a way to take away a few of your rights there too. They'll make it harder for you, which is a concession a lot of people will be willing to make. But right now, the Ukrainian propaganda firms are working very hard to make the association of the Russians and the Mexicans. So it's only a matter of time before that, flywheel effect catches in the mainstream. And all of a sudden, you're going to see, Biden has approved border, funding so that we can stop the Russians from coming over. And we're also going to, bundle up in that $100 billion for Ukraine's 50,000 women. And so they can have guns with their new uniforms and actually not have to fight for fully loaded magazines. All right, what else do we got going on here? Bitcoin, the SEC, and this, I don't even believe this. I can't even believe this. This is supposed to be the unhackable crypto, right? What the hell just happened there? Oh, it was a glitch. It's supposed to be, and it is, right? Until we figure out some quantum computing AI code. But the SEC Twitter account was hacked, and apparently they came out and said that this Bitcoin ETF had been approved, so everybody bought in and they pumped it. I mean, this is classic Bogdanov. If you know the Bogdanov meme, pump it, dump it, this is classic. This will go down in the history books because they got hacked. They said that they approved the ETF. Bitcoin goes up immediately a couple percent, which is not a huge swing for Bitcoin, but I'm quite certain that had this run on for a while, that probably would have went to 55, definitely cleared 50, no problem. And it just plummeted, and now it's plummeting again. So some people are saying that this was an accidental tweet, that they had almost approved it, but they didn't formally approve it yet, and this was a tweet that they were saving at some point, or perhaps somebody got a hold of the computer, or maybe they did actually get hacked. Maybe it was a person at X who's at fault for this, but there'll definitely be a massive investigation because, of course, this little fluctuation is billions of dollars that somebody made and somebody lost. So somebody's going to be very upset with that. Okay, we talked about that. Telegram, I'm very suspicious about Telegram and pretty much all these platforms for that matter. Remember, anything that's free, you are the product. People think, oh, X, Elon Musk is your savior. Guys, I mean, come on, man. Come on, we've been through this hundreds of times before, okay? Even if the person is well-intentioned, as Elon, and they get into it for the right reasons, ultimately, you're either corrupted or you're blackmailed. And Telegram is no different. So Telegram originated in Russia, okay? And it has hundreds of millions of users. People from all over the world, okay? Now, most high-level government employees, they can't even use, of many countries, they can't even use Apple, Android. Like in Russia, I was told recently that the Russians have their own, the government officials, they have their own type of phone that they make. because every app is like a backdoor into, you know, potentially getting hacked. So Telegram's business model, they have no business model. And apparently, I mean, this I think has been co-opted by the Kremlin a long time ago. I'm harping on Telegram here, but the same is true for X. Elon made it abundantly clear that if the United States wanted to use Starlink for military purposes, he would relinquish control. And even if that meant giving that control over to the Ukrainians at the behest of the United States, he would do it. So what's to stop him from, if it came down to national security interests, from, you know, banning a few accounts or potentially utilizing the service to send out some emergency alert, even if it was disinformation, in order to subdue the population. And that is something that I'm surprised we haven't seen yet on social media, is a nationwide test of social media apps that actually have to comply with these emergency alert regulations. Now you'd think, well, it will come on your cell phone, you'll see it on your cell phone first, but even just on the app, if you're using it on a computer, there should be some warning there, right? So anyways, I'm very suspicious of Telegram and its hundreds of millions of users, that their data is most definitely compromised, being hijacked. Cybersecurity friend of mine says, well, that might be true, but it'd be very difficult to decipher the information. Looks like my battery's gonna die. So chances are we gotta wrap this up, but I will, yeah, we'll leave it at that. Oh, and Don Lemon's coming back to X. I told you, and he's gonna have the right-wing grift. I guarantee, I said that on this channel when he got canceled, that he's coming back and it's gonna be a right-wing grift. I would bet money on it. Thanks for watching, guys. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Canadian.